Hello, everyone, and welcome to Spot TV Forecast 2021, a TV News Check Working Lunch webinar. Your moderator today is Janet Stilson, contributing editor to TV News Check. If you want to ask a question at any point during the webinar, please type it into the Q&A window. Janet, go ahead and begin whenever you're ready.
Hello, everyone. Well, I am really looking forward to hearing what our panelists have to say. As I was thinking about the significance of trying to get a handle on what's going to happen this year and what's happened so far, I was thinking back to what happened in the second quarter of last year when the vast majority of media plans came to a complete halt. And so we know how strange things have been and might possibly be strange again. We'll see what these guys have to say. I'm going to stop my interview questions about 20 minutes before 2 o'clock and open up the Q&A box and see what all of you would like to ask our panelists. Don't put your questions in the chat box because I probably won't see it. So without further ado, let me introduce our panelists. We have Julio Merengue, who's President Advertising Sales at CBS television stations. Becky Meyer, is it Meyer? Becky? Meyer, sorry. SVP National Sales at Gray Television. Brad Thompson, SVP and Partner Integrated Investment at Worldwide. Rick Ducey, Managing Director of BIA Advisory Services, and Bruce Roberts, President of Wide Orbit. So I'd like to start with a question for Julio and Becky in that order. I did a story for TV News Check back in early October of last year that forecasts that core spot, in other words, all the categories except for political, in 2021 was going to be up 7.4%. And of course, that's off a decline for last year of 18%. So you have to put it in perspective. But I'm wondering if that kind of forecast, that 7.4% increase this year, if that jibes with what you're expecting.
Yeah, so thanks, Janet. Yeah, so far, it's been pretty robust Q1, and we think that 7.4 is actually fairly conservative. I think this could be a low double-digit year because, of course, the baseline comparing it to core of last year, with second quarter in particular, would be hard to do. I mean, if you go back and almost frame 19, which was a pretty good year, even non-politically, core off of that would be a little less than that, but it's picking up from pre-pandemic levels. But 7.4 as an early projection would be, it's safe to say, I think we're in line with that. At one point, we were concerned a little bit because Q1 was breaking later and we weren't sure if the fiscal year changed from being COVID 2020 to now a new year with these budgets being analyzed a little differently, that we would maybe have some pushback on spending. But sure enough, it started coming in pretty quickly around November, and it's been going for Q1. And it looks like the year, even with automotive, still struggling a little bit.
Becky, what do you think?
I too would agree with that. I think that's a conservative number. Back when we were in the midst of the budgeting process, that we would line up with that. But I think with what we're seeing in the first quarter, spending in January is up double digits versus last year, which was pre-pandemic. We have to keep in mind January and February business was fairly solid going into 2020 overall. And there are some real bright spots. While Julio said the automotive category is dragging a bit, but we've got some early encouraging pacing numbers, which keeps me optimistic, cautiously, because we're still in a pandemic.
Oh, what categories are you seeing besides automotive? What are the real standouts? I mean, obviously that's fine, but
financial services for me, financial services, and the entertainment category as well. People are more inclined to be watching from home, so a lot of the OTT providers are spending on releases and those kind of things. And then we have the Super Bowl this year, but distilled spirits and beverages have been spending at a pretty good level for us. So that's been part of it. Sorry, Becky, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you there.
No, that's fun. That's great. We've got, the categories that stand out for us in our group are sportsbook betting. That category is just exploding. And pharma is second one I would pick. And insurance is also very strong, between medical insurance, supplemental insurance, even off the sign up times with the new administration. I think there's all kinds of things that are going to be driving that moving forward.
Brad, can you give us our perspective in terms of both the projection, if it lines up with what you're expecting, and also categories that are really popping?
Sure. Janet, I'm going to take a little bit of a contrarian view. From our perspective, I think the 7.4% is high. We're thinking it's going to be tough to get back to flat. I think we're actually looking at possibly being down slightly year over year. I think the continuing struggle of some of the categories due to the pandemic is definitely playing a part in it. And I think that the transition or the big shift away from linear into digital during the pandemic, we're not sure that that's going to come back to linear the way other people might expect it to be coming back. Our early take on spend is not showing an increase to that level, but I think to show some optimism in what I'm saying, I think a quick recovery, which is, how likely that's going to be, I'm not sure, but a quick recovery could change those numbers and could cause us to relook at this, but we're not as optimistic on this side.
Well, what categories are dragging? Is it QSR?
Yes, that is. I think travel, entertainment. I mean, anything that has really been impacted. And I think both Julio and Becky mentioned automotive. Automotive, I think, has some headwinds that they're fighting against right now, as well.
Okay. All right. Great. So, Rick, what are you seeing in terms of overall changes? What you're expecting Spot to experience this year, and what categories do you think will show significant growth in 2021?
Sure, yeah. This time last year, things were looking pretty rosy, of course, and coming through a lot of pain through the pandemic quarters, 2, 3, 4. This year starting to look a little bit better with the vaccine rolling out more or less quickly. So we factored in some growth driver from the impact of vaccinations and people being released from their homes and the economy reopening. That'll probably be on a regional basis, depending upon how the vaccines get rolled out. Overall, we called last year, we're estimating it will be $18.3 billion for 2021 for Spot TV, including both over the air and the online. Digital revenue for 21, we're seeing 15.7 billion. So if you back out the political revenue, basically we're showing an increase. And in some of the categories, we're seeing the same thing. So in auto, some increase there, but auto repair is one that breaks in the double digits for us. Auto repair, we're calling it 12.4%. People are hanging on to their cars a bit longer, perhaps, and still need to have them running. Another couple categories, finance, we were hearing about, we're definitely seeing that. Pretty much all the sub-verticals in our finance super vertical are double digit or better. The different insurance, credit, card services, the investment advice services, things like that. And then maybe a bit optimistic, but also high double digit, Julio, like you were saying, in the entertainment or leisure category. We're seeing high double-digit growth there in the teens for most of the sub-verticals. Again, assuming we go back to theaters and venue-based events and so on. That's sort of an overview of what we're seeing looking ahead.
Okay. Bruce, can you give us your perspective on what you're expecting this year?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Janet. Thanks also for having me on the panel. And hi, everyone. Hope everybody's healthy and belated Happy New Year. Let me set the table first on the data. So we pulled data from about 2,300 stations. So that includes the primaries, the D1s, the D2s. We aggregate it all and then we anonymize it. So we can't identify an NBC versus a CBS versus, Fox Broadcasting, et cetera. The data that I have is right now just about a week old. We're seeing something a little bit different than what Julia and Becky have mentioned, but again, we're just looking at first quarter pace, not looking specifically at January. And right now, basically across those 2,300 stations, pace is down a little more than 7%, which isn't terribly bad. So it's not, impactful yet. We break it down into categories. The great news is that the biggest category, revenue category, is services, and that's flat right now. Finances, like everybody else has talked about, is up pretty dramatically, about 26%. Food is up about 11%. Some of the categories that are down that we're seeing is automotive, which kind of aligns with what Becky and Julio said. We're seeing that down about 17%, retail down about 9.5%. Interestingly, entertainment is still lagging, so we're seeing that down about 19%. And then the big category still, because I think of the impact of COVID, we're seeing restaurants down about 32% right now. Another metric.
I'm sorry, is that for the first quarter, your numbers, or what?
Just first quarter. So
we Bruce, that takes the Bloomberg money out too. Has no political in there, right?
Yeah. So this is non-political. This is purely core. Interestingly, there's another metric to look at, you guys, which I find interesting, is also advertiser count. In other words, the number of advertisers in each category. And I found it interesting in looking at the data that it actually correlates almost perfectly, or aligns perfectly, with what the revenue base is. So, the number of automotive advertisers is down, the number of restaurant advertisers is down, whereas services and finance, as well as food, is up, correlating with what the revenue base is.
And when you say services, what are you referring to? Is that financial services?
It can be local financial services, but not like credit cards. It's typically legal services, cleaning services, local financial services, et cetera.
Okay, great. So I have a question that I'd like to pose to Julio, then Becky, and then Brad, which is, I want to talk about advertisers that may be moving from linear spot to streaming services. I'm wondering if you're seeing a significant migration at this point in time.
Not significant, but it is definitely growing. There's no question. It's not to be mistaken for linear in terms of that. And, in terms of scale and budget. So, at one point about a year ago, I was, my off comment would have been to, a lot of the sellers, when they're getting renewals back in and people are negotiating and buyers are asking for early morning, early news, late news, and then they'd say, oh, and put OTT in there as well. I often push back and I say, well, OTT is really not a day part. We're trying to sell that as a standalone. It's a separate currency. It's, it's optimized differently. And we're taking in some digital spend. However, it feels like, and Brad could probably support that too, the agencies and clients are asking for those kind of solutions. And so it's kind of getting morphed into the linear spend to some degree. And obviously some of it's from the digital spending. So I'm not sure it's, we can categorize our standalone advertisers that we've been doing business regularly, that they've been carving off a sizable amount of money, but there definitely is interest there. And then, the next part of that, which, would be the next question later, but it's going to be about, the capacity we have to sell what we have to sell, what we offer in that space, because it's, it just feels like it's a, it's open to, a lot of different interpretations on how it's sold. So the scale is just not, we're seeing it. It's definitely, there's a desire for it. But it's now, this is about the all screen activations that we've all talked about. How is this going to be, linear, pre-roll, mid-roll, and OTT, and we have all these offerings. I think we're seeing ourselves move in that direction, but not this year in terms of, a significant amount of money, but there's definitely more money than it was a year ago. So it's moving in that direction, there's no question. And at least that's what we're seeing.
Becky, what are you seeing?
We're seeing the same thing. I think Brad can probably speak to the correlation. I mean, I wish we could get away from OTT is growing solely at linear's expense, because I think that's just the assumption. And I think there's a really good place for all of it to harmoniously work together, rather than focusing on the numbers are different or viewership has changed. of course it's changed, and we do see a migration and an interest into OTT. And one day we want it to all be video, of course, but we've got a long ways to go before we have a metric that makes sense to apply across all places. But yes, we're seeing a definite shift, but I'm also in some ways I'm seeing us hold our own. And with some certainly certain agencies are locally more friendly. But that's, those are kind of my 2 cents on it. But Brad can probably give us a much better insight to that.
What do you have?
Go ahead, Janet, sorry.
I was just throwing the baton to you.
I mean, I agree with both of them. I agree with Becky. I agree with Julia. I think we're definitely seeing a shift. I think it's a continuation of a shift we've been seeing. It's an evolution that's been happening. I don't necessarily know that there's been a huge change. Again, like linear is still linear, and the digital video side hasn't overtaken that. As Becky said, looking at it all as video, that's the ultimate goal and the outcome. We have a long way to go to get there. But I think everybody's working towards that point. And as Becky said, I don't think it's necessarily happening at the detriment of the linear affiliates. I don't. I think there's a space for what they can offer on the digital video side, and I think that's how we approach it. So I think it's just a gradual shift towards how viewership is changing, and I think we continue to evolve with it.
Okay. Rick, has BIA done any forecasting on the growth of local station streaming services over the course of this year?
Yeah, we have. We added a new category breakout in our forecast a year or so ago, looking at over the top as a category. And that's primarily connected TV. I'll comment on that in a sec. So whatever stations are making in that streaming category, now we pull into the over-the-top category. But that also includes other locally targeted ad revenue in that over-the-top platform. So Hulu local, YouTube local, Roku local, as well as what the stations are doing. So in 2020, we're calling it at about a $1 billion marketplace, locally targeted ads on OTT. For 2021, we're growing at about 20% to about $1.2 billion. So, I mean, that's the magnitude of the spend relative to what we're talking about with linear TV, a lot more spend. The local, if you want to target, and Brad knows this as well as anybody, if you want to target, geo-target local ads in OTT, the inventory, there's a lot of different inventory sources, and it's a bit fragmented. From a linear perspective, it's great because the TV groups, all of whom and networks have OTT offers, direct-to-consumer offers, or some sort of local aggregation of inventory, make it easier to have those locally targeted ad impressions, are adding some momentum to the market. So clearly it's growth. And then from a linear perspective, like you were saying, Becky, linear video kind of owns the show in terms of spend. And it actually can become an advantage because you can do some audience extension on these OTT platforms to reach some other audiences that broadcasters deliver in the digital as well as the over-the-air realm. I saw one number that there was a TV group that for the local news product, in some markets, it was as high as 30 to 40%, and some demos were entirely streaming. So that is becoming a significant part of the broadcast audience, the TV news and other content that gets delivered over the top. But right now, it's high growth off a low base. The targeting and all the digital tools we get with that are really interesting, and it gives broadcasters the ability to deliver our advertisers an extended audience reach. And somebody from Samsung and on a webinar was saying that for Samsung connected TVs, I think it was 25% of the viewing is only over the top. So it's not just an extension. I mean, it's getting to a point now where it really is. I like the way you say, Julia, it's just not another day part. It's actually a thing. And so we're all, on the beginning, but fast growing end of what this OTT thing will become.
Bruce, what's your research showing you in terms of advertisers turning to streaming and maybe shifting away from linear? Are you seeing any movement in that direction, or what are the trends that you're seeing?
Yeah, great question. Thank you, Janet. So while our traffic system and our sales proposal system help manage digital, we have no way of telling if it leaves the station, where does it go? We just don't have that visibility. What we do have visibility into is digital revenue at the station level. And what we're seeing is pretty encouraging. So pace-wise, this year to last year, digital revenue for the station group, again, across those 2,300 stations, is up over 14%. Even a little bit more telling is last year, when the onset of COVID hit, while there was a dip in digital and traditional revenue, obviously, the dip for digital was less, it recovered more quickly, and overall for the year, it paced almost 6% ahead of 2019. That's a cool thing. I also think we have to keep looking forward. And sorry, my hands are like all over the place. I feel like Will Ferrell in Talladega Nights. What do I do with my hands? Anyway, we got to look forward. And one of the big things coming on the horizon that I think is exciting is ATSC 3.0. The opportunity to go head to head with digital publishers, with targeting and everything else. The digital revenues for the stations is going to explode. So to me, keep looking forward. It's going to be pretty cool and exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I wanted to ask Julio and Becky as well about how you see streaming revenue affecting the overall revenue of stations. Do you think it's going to increase the total pot by a significant amount and really help stations that are feeling challenged by some of these categories that we've been talking about?
Well, a few things to think about there. First of all, who's the publisher of this content is number one, because stations at some point could end up being just a rep for the third party, and if they're taking in more, creating more content for it, then yeah, it becomes an add-on, and the budgeting process starts to deliver on that, and stations start to see the benefit of it. But I go back to Becky's point, and it's the all-screen activation future that feels pretty good. I think currently we're up against a couple of two-headed monsters. One in particular would be Hulu, who's been geofencing the local marketplaces for a number of years now, and not only just going after traditional digital money, but they're going after the linear money in our marketplaces, and with some significant advertisers, and every right in the world to do so, and they have been. So it's it's a challenge that the budgets actually have been maybe planned to come into our market as they would normally, but there's some linear holdings in the market that have more scale than we would have already as a local station. So yeah, for us to get a portfolio and start to put content and populate the content with enough significant scale to start selling it, absolutely. But I think we have enough to start with right now with like us at CBS, with our holdings, with our CBSN local product, which is an owned and operated news product that's tailored for OTT, which has gotten great viewership, and we want to expand on that. That's a news vertical. We also have partnerships with our own company, with Pluto, and eventually with what we'll see in Paramount Plus to start to represent the space in our markets for that to grow. So, and everybody's got their own lane to skate in that area. So I think and what Becky's going through with Gray and how they'll build out their portfolio, I think all of us have that to look forward to, and how we approach the scale and how it's built. So taking to your point, Janet, the revenue will grow with what we have the capacity to sell, or what we're going to create to satisfy that area. And I do believe linear is going to be around for quite a bit of time. I just think it complements all sides of this together combined. And I think that we'll see growth from that for sure.
Okay, excellent. Brad, do you have any perspective on that you'd like to add in terms of when you?
Yeah, I'm not sure I can add a whole lot. I mean, I think in the short term, you can't help but see some revenue loss just because you have players like Hulu in the local space. But I think maybe to Julio's point, the long term looks good, because I think as the attractiveness of the space overall grows, I think you're going to see more spend come into local overall. There's some things we'll be talking about later on, I think, that play a part of that as we as we become more automated, as we go to impression based, as we layer these things into what we can do with local, I think the space becomes much more attractive. And I think if you've got a bigger pie to work with, then it's all going to trickle down, and you're going to be in better shape in the long run.
Okay, great. Rick, I wanted to ask you, if you strip away digital video and you look at other forms of digital, how is the spending going to change over the next year?
Well, as we've heard, digital is going to grow. So we said digital, all forms of digital end up at about $55 billion in 2020. And we see that growing to $61.5 billion in 2021. Over the next couple of years, say by 2023 or so, half of what gets spent targeting local audiences will be on digital ad platforms. And I'm not sure how much more it grows beyond that 50-50 split between traditional linear platforms, if you will, and digital platforms. Because of the traditional platforms like TV, outdoor radio bring significant value propositions to advertisers. Digital has been high growth because of its ability to do some of the things Bruce was just talking about, targeting and automated workflow, things like that. But I think on the the broadcast side, it's catching up with some of those workflow and different value propositions, moving towards impressions. So some of the things that drove growth in digital, I think those are coming into linear TV, so that will make the channel more attractive to advertisers. But yeah, definitely more growth in digital ahead, and that does come at the expense of some of the traditional media. I mean, typically newspaper. I do hear it comes from some of the traditional budgets like TV. So the OTT component to what the broadcast groups are bringing to the market is nice, because it keeps some of that money, even helps to grow it. But the digital is still a growth story. Mobile driven a lot by Facebook, which gets, I think, 90% of its revenue from mobile channels. And then Google and now Amazon is coming in as a big number 3 in digital, taking up a big chunk of the local ad spending in the digital platforms.
Okay, great. So Brad, I want to come back to you and ask you about the amount of transactions in the spot, specific to spot, that are done on automated platforms at this point and at UM.
Yeah, so for UM, the vast majority of what we do is executed through automated platforms at this point, at least on the pre-buy side. So we definitely have automation in a lot of those processes up front. We are not yet executing end to end in an automated fashion the way we are looking to execute in the future. We are still working with our partners on that, getting that up to speed and getting that ready to go. But the vast majority we are executing with some level of automation, at least in the negotiation and the RFP front.
Okay. How do you expect that to change over the next year? Is there any sort of goalposts that you're looking at?
Well, again, I think it's the end-to-end piece. I think to truly get the full benefit of automation, you have to be end-to-end with it. That's where I'm talking about the stewardship and the bill pay piece. Those pieces have to be layered into it. And that is our focus now, is getting those up and running and where we want them to be.
Okay. Julio and Becky, can you give us your perspective on when you think automated buying and selling is really going to be the dominant form of transaction for spot?
Go ahead, Becky, you want to jump?
I really wanted to believe that it was going to be 2022. But here we are. And, like Brad said, all of us are doing 0 in automation if you define it from end to end. That just doesn't exist. We haven't been able to figure that out. And we are operating on any platform. It's challenging on the sales side, because on the sales side, we have to be there for any platform, whether it be PVX or Hudson or Wide Orbit, their platform. So we've got a lot of balls to juggle, and while I was hopeful that we were making progress, it feels like we take 2 steps forward and then 5 back. So we just end up in this hole. I'm hopeful that this will be a reset year. And I would like to say, my revised projection would be, 2024.
Well,
You're going to have political that gets interjected in your even years. People are going to be challenged to do something in that year, and end to end, we're talking about copy. There's a lot of moving parts and pieces to make that happen, and I'm defining it as end to end.
okay.
Yeah, automation is great. And I think the first thing people thought of when everybody brought this up was, we don't want to be programmatic. It's not programmatic, and it's automation to help Brad, for instance, and keep the friction points to a point where we're activating and continuing to advocate for Spot in a more efficient way. But my thing is that pay for performance that we're doing, changing some business rules, going to impression-based, these are the seeds, I think, that, forget automation for a minute. We agree on these rules. We're almost automating with manual work, meaning the fact that we just kind of agree that we're going to do business this way. We can cut down on some of the friction we already have built in. Before we start hitting, click and send, and it's all nice. I just think it's a business rules conversation, and then by that it's thought about it. And Becky's point's right. We're going to be an even odd year business, but the supply demand model we're in, $800 looks like 1,500 later, and you're preempting that model. It feels still like 70s, 80s, 90s, spot TV business that we still work with, especially with displacement of political. But I think, and I maintain, that there's strip programming, newses, fringe programming that we sell regularly that can be just locked and loaded and optimized efficiently to begin with. And then, big events, football, Super Bowls, primetime events can be still kind of worked around. But we can clean up some of this bandwidth immediately with some, basically rules of engagement that make sense for both parties. And we're seeing that with pay for performance because we feel that we want to bet on ourselves to deliver it, but we want to get paid as much as we can for what the value is. But at the same time, we don't want the liability carriage. We don't want the stewardship of it being continuing on. We feel that's costing us as much, if not more money, for the agencies, number one, and number two, for us, because we're giving away inventory that we could have actually been, buttoned up and done with and moved on to the next iteration. But political will always be in our lives, so we're never going to be like a broadcast or cable network where we don't have disruptions. And there's no secret here. I mean, network takes political, yes, CNN's taken some money, there's been some nationals, but they're not in our league at all. It's all local, political spends local. And the other reason is if the networks wanted to, they would, but it would disrupt their upfront marketplace. And political coming in at the 11th hour would be this massive scatter that they just wouldn't maintain. So to some degree, that category for them is sort of like, well, wait a minute, I'm taking $5 billion in the upfront, and this political is coming in for 6 weeks. It would disrupt their whole upfront marketplace. So we're still going to be the benefactors, I think, in the long run. So we can do some workarounds when it comes to how we deal with it. But I think in the odd years, and even in years when we do have political and non-windows, or if it's a 2022 with statewide elections, or part of the country is you're not active in your market as much, you're still going to be selling business regularly and not try to disrupt as much as possible. But I do think there's some low-hanging fruit that we can work on immediately. And I think, to Becky's point, yeah, it might take 4 more years, but I think it's an agreed upon along the ownership groups of all of us in local spots to kind of come up with, some rules of engagement that makes sense for all of us. And we're getting that a little bit with conversations we've had with clients, especially Brad, at UM, we've been working with you guys on pay for performance and working with you to try to work that way. And so we feel that I think will get us next to because I feel all we're doing is automating the current way we do business, which is a friction point related, make good supply demand model. And we're automating that. And I don't think that's going to benefit too much if we continue to go that direction.
Bruce, what do you think when you hear what Becky and Julio have to say about their expectations?
Yeah, I'm going to echo a little bit of what they both said for sure, but I kind of break things into buckets. I'm not terribly intelligent, so I need to keep things so simple. And when people talk about automated TV, I think of workflow automation. And that's exactly what Julio just said in terms of what parts of the transaction that takes place today can we automate. Now, is it for the future, a great thing yet to be determined, but if we can reduce the friction involved in that transaction, I think all the better. And then the second part basically is quote unquote automated or programmatic type of buying. On the workflow automation, I think it's important to automate as much as we possibly can. So we're working with broadcast groups like Becky's and Julio's. We're working with Media Ocean and Hudson MX, identifying parts of the transaction from beginning to end of what can be automated. So something as simple as an RFP response or proposal generation. We can generate a proposal, a recommended proposal, and say, this should probably be what you go to the advertiser with, and it cuts down the time that NAE is involved in there. Other things throughout the entire process, like make goods. We can do automated make goods eventually. We can do the make good recommendations, have the rules that Julio mentioned in terms of coming back from the agency. Here's a rule. All right, we apply that rule to the make good recommendation and apply the make good automatically. And then going to the back end of posting and air times, things like that. We're continuing to work there. And by we, I mean us, the industry. So electronic material ingestion, order validation. Those things can all be automated to reduce the friction and the time it takes to buy spot TV. I think that's critically important. The other side, getting back to that programmatic or automated TV, I think the closest thing right now, not patting us on the back, but our open marketplace product is probably as close as we can get right now to a true automated transaction. But we're continually looking at that and saying, okay, is there ways that we can improve it even more to attract more advertisers? So again, I break things down into two groups, Janet.
Okay. Rick, what is your research showing in terms of how automated transactions are going to change over the next year or two?
Yeah, pretty much what you just heard.
Okay.
I think this move towards automation, and I like the buckets you laid out, Bruce. It's very technology centric in one sense, but Julio, I think you really elevated the importance of the people side. So even if it's a technology laced discussion, I think this change moves at the speed of people, not at the speed of technology. I kind of feel the pain a little bit of people like in Bruce's seat and some of the tech vendor seats, where it's like, we can build stuff, tell us what you want. And then it gets back to business rules and the basic challenge that you were saying, Julio, of we can automate existing processes probably somewhat quickly, but is that really what we want to do? So the conversation gets confounded a bit. Not only are we working towards automation, but looking at the underlying workflow, business processes, business rules, and saying, what of that do we want to keep? What do we want to change? So it's really a number of different things kind of roll up into one ball that takes years to sort out in spite of everyone's best efforts. So 2024, sure, that would be a good year.
Okay. All right, let's talk about impressions. I'd like to ask first Becky, then Julio, and then Brad about the percentage of your transactions that use impressions as a currency right now.
Currently, right now, I'd say of our national business, 65%. Of our total business, I'd say about half, because you're factoring in smaller regional agencies that are still, on the cost per point GRP thing.
Yeah, we're a little behind on that, but probably in the 40% overall range. That's local and national combined, more so on the national side as agencies start to seek that, which is a blessing for us as we're trying to push that, get out of the zero sell business and start to sell everything on the table. And if we're going to compete, again, with other mediums, as we talked about, call it OTT, call it everything else, we want to put the kitchen sink in every buy we have. And that's every eyeball we can find. So we're seeing that the agencies actually are starting to understand that as well and help in that regard. So we're seeing more. That's a good sign.
Great. What are you seeing, Brad?
We're 100% and have been for 5 years. I think we helped lead the way. I'm pretty confident of that we led the way. It's been very successful for us, and we're thrilled that we've done it. And we think it's set us up for the future, and encourage all the other agencies to get on board with that.
That's why we did our first pay for performance deal with you, because you guys advocated for impressions early.
Yeah,
and that was one of the things we wanted to have in doing so. Yeah,
I agree. And like we talked about before, it's all part of it. The technology is part of it, and the pay for the business rules are part of it. It all has to work together for this to move forward. And we've been laying that out whether it's pay for performance or whether it's impressions-based buying, we've been laying that out, prepping for this future that's coming, that's here, that's here and upon us.
Okay, so Bruce, what are you seeing in terms of the transactions that are flowing through Wide Orbit's system? How much of them are based on impressions?
Yeah, it pretty much aligns with Becky and Julia. Looking across the entire 2,300 stations, interestingly, we're seeing growth. I look back at the data from 2018 to 2019 to 2020 and now, and it is steadily growing. Right now, interestingly, it's more greater growth and higher percentage for major markets than it is for medium to small markets. So we're seeing on across the group about 40% right now is of impression-based buys. When you get down to some of the smaller markets, it gets a little bit below 30%.
Rick, do you have a sense of why it's taking so long? Why the move to impressions is happening so slowly?
Yeah, I mean, we hear different things. It goes back to the change at the speed of people instead of the speed of technology. Julio was mentioning that some of the smaller agencies still like to go on GRPs. And so it's culture, it's familiarity with things. It's, kind of a practice stance between buyer and seller in some of these cases. And Bruce, what you're saying about major markets versus some of the smaller markets. Smaller markets do a lot more direct selling, and that relies on personal relationships and tried and true ways of having dialogues. So it's really the people factor. I mean, as we move towards converged video platforms and marketing and video on the buy sell side, whatever the platform, impressions, is going to be where we're headed. And Brad, you're there, and the rest of us are trying to catch up. But it comes back down to people factors, I think. And what people's preferences are and what gets a deal done. If you want to transact in rating points, so we will.
Right. I'm going to stop asking my questions now, even though I have like 2 extra pages of questions to go. I wanted to make sure that we get some answers to questions that the audience is posing. We have one question which was posted very early in our session today when we were talking about expectations for the first quarter and moving on into 21. The attendee is asking, are we taking into consideration that January was a 4-week month in 2020 and it's a 5-week month in 2021? Any thoughts on that? Does that change the scenario at all?
Sure. Yeah, we change it on a monthly basis, not on a quarterly basis, but yeah, for sure, for January.
For
Right.
January alone.
Mhm.
I think it's less impactful when there's an extra week in January because it's a slower start
Right.
month.
Coming out of
We've
holiday.
got that first week that's it's not a totally dead zone, but we use it a lot for under delivery and that kind of stuff. So it's less impactful on January than it would be, say, in December or November.
Okay. So we have a question from Dan Casey who's asking, what do you see in terms of spending levels for local cable TV? Any thoughts on that? Rick, do you have projections on that?
Yeah, so for local cable in 2020, we estimated that to be 5.6 billion. For 2021, we're seeing it drop down to 4.7. And it's local cable with political and its ability to target political is a nice platform for political years. So we see that even year growth, and then it settles back down in odd years. But so give or take 5 billion-ish or so, a little bit more in even years, a little bit less in odd years.
Okay, all right. Here's another question, which is clearly directed to Bruce. Will Wide Orbit ever be able to run in traffic OTT campaigns so we can get one reach/frequency number for OTT and linear campaigns?
Yeah, so the short answer is yes. The first step was putting digital order management directly into the traffic system so you can handle both digital and linear business. The longer answer is we're working on a product now that I'm sure many of you have heard about, but many of you may have not. It's called their unified sales solution. And that's where it'll all come together on the upfront. That's where sales assistants, they'll spend all of their time, and whether it's a linear or an OTT or some other type of digital opportunity, it'll all be handled there. and then you can bring it all together so that you can create that one reach and frequency number.
Okay, great. We have a question from Rick Burris, who asks, since all stations had varying years in 2020, what is your predictions for spot 2021 versus 2019?
That's a great question, and it's something that during the budget process we framed up well. We want to call 2020 a bogey year, and looked at 19 pre-pandemic when there was momentum. And to your point, for us, depending, the footprint you're in versus our marketplaces, we're seeing anywhere from -3 to -5 off of 19. And that's coming off of 17 million, SARs for car sales being very robust and, very good years. We all know we all finished the year strong, and forgetting coming into a political year 2020 before we knew what was going to happen, it looked like the momentum was there to continue. And so if you took 2020 out and went to 19, more so framing it from -3 to -5 potential on core is what we saw. So I don't know, where everybody else is. That's kind of what but that's one analysis we definitely looked at.
Becky, what did you do that analysis?
We did, and we might be a little bit better than that, because you have to remember that 88% of our markets are in the grouping that would be about 65 and smaller. So those markets are going to be less impacted because they do more of their business direct to the business locally. So I would say we'd be a little bit better than that, just because of the complexion of our two groups that are different in that way.
Right. Rick, I know that BIA does do forecasting in 2 years spans, right? That's the way you like to frame it up, right?
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, to even out, we do year over year because that's the way people like to see it, but it almost makes more sense to do a running average combining 2 years if you want to get a fair look at how the data play out, but that's not the way the real world likes to see things. So 2020, very aberrant year. 2019 becomes then sort of a base year. But so many things have changed because of the pandemic. It's hard to see. I mean, auto sales are going to be different in 2021 than they were in 2019. But I think it's going to take a bit to recover still from the pre-pandemic years. And as the policies start to take effect in the economy, we see businesses respond to that as businesses start to reopen. And again, the stay-at-home orders get relaxed. We're looking for signals in early 21, first quarter, second quarter, to see if we need to adjust our forecast up. Hopefully we do.
Okay, great. Anybody else want to weigh in on that question? We can. I want to just remind the audience that I'm taking questions in the Q&A box if you have one. But I have tons of questions of my own. I mean, one of the things that I'm really interested in right now is Nielsen's inclusion of broadband-only homes in the sample for Spot TV. And I understand that, I get the sense that there's a difference of opinion between broadcasters and agencies about whether it makes sense to do it now. Nielsen has asked the Media Ratings Council to halt its audit of their sample because they're undergoing so many challenges in terms of getting into new homes and servicing the equipment that they have in existing homes. Julio and Becky, do you want to answer it? And then Brad, I'd love to get your perspective as well.
I mean, Nielsen, once again, I mean, they just can't seem to understand. They can't multitask here. I mean, right now, local market samples because of COVID and issues prior to COVID, they have sample representation in there, and that's fine. And Nielsen now wants to introduce, and recruit new types of homes, during this time, and we're not sure they can maintain that, or it would be reliable to, do that at this given time. So they haven't even created universe estimates on market level wide for us. So, we stand by kind of what the MRC is. They're not in agreement with this. We believe it's a little too fast. As Steve Lanzano has championed as head of TVB, BBB homes when it's right, not right now. And I can't be more emphatic about saying it just isn't, the way to go. And I also believe it's just so many different variables, like, what constitutes the BVO. And you mentioned, Janet, before about, the viewership and what qualifies. And we feel like linear at this point still has a place. Local broadcast does. A lot of these devices, in terms of being able to watch broadcasts, especially on a smart TV, maybe in a broadband-only home, and the ability to watch broadcasts is there as well. So there's a long way to go in this, and we just feel it's just they're overstating it too soon for us and rushing to do it. It feels like 15 years ago with LPMs and the way that was rolled out to the agency side versus how it was positioned to us in terms of how this currency would be or how it would affect the currency. So I think there's just, the rush here just seems to be too much for us to, to be able to deal with in a correct manner at this point.
Becky, you want to weigh in?
Sure. What Julio said with that, it feels like the LPM transition to us, it feels like the diary to RPD transition.
Exactly right.
Where
Oh God, that's even worse.
Yeah, the messaging is very different. And we have 9 of our 94 markets subscribed to Nielsen currently. Which we've got issues with the current methodology. So it's kind of like putting another layer on top of a faulty foundation. And that makes for a house that can come down. So we want to make sure, like talking about the health of the existing panels and, not using markets that don't make sense to line up with, as I mentioned before, we have many markets that are RPD, and that's our big concern about the ability to properly measure them, as opposed to how do you properly measure Cleveland or Charlotte. It's a different story.
Do you mind if I weigh in real quick, Janet? I apologize.
Absolutely.
We have a fair amount of exposure, obviously, because of our W Media sales product. It's not ready. It's a little bit of a mess. There's just way too many questions about the methodology and the results of the methodology. In some instances, we're seeing some stations gain 20% in impressions, others drop 20%. Elsewhere, we're seeing like declines in ratings and impressions. We think the impression is or was the way Nielsen is kind of weighting the sample. But we're not sure. The panel talked a little bit before the meeting started about the 5 minutes. In other words, that all a viewer has to do is log on, view something for 5 minutes over the span of 3 months. So they could watch it 1 minute for 1 month, 2 minutes for the second month, and another minute for the third or second minute. But it's just, there's too much up in the air right now for it to be a reliable data source.
Right. So do you have the ability to, this may be a very simple question. When the BBO homes are added to the sample completely in the second quarter, do you have the ability to just say to advertisers, let's forget about this. Let's just go with the sample that we have been using? Is there that option?
We're going to have to create that option.
Yeah.
I think from the agency, they're going to use it to their advantage the minute they go live with that information and start to use it as a negotiating arm to us. That's just where we don't want to be at that point. So I think that's the one thing that the agencies would, if they take a hard look at that, would be, again, more inclined to use it against us to some degree, and rightfully so if it's going live.
Brad, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, it's going live. I'm not sure that I see a way around it if that's the currency that we're using today. I don't see a way logistically to execute without doing it. And I think I think from the agency perspective, I think we I understand the challenges. I do, but I think for a long time, we've wanted a more complete view of the marketplace. And I think when we talk about rushing it, I think we first started talking about rolling this out 4 or 5 years ago when Network did. So I think we want to be aligned with that. And I think from our viewpoint, it's something we're proceeding with. And we understand there's always some rough going in this transition, in any transition with a methodology change, and we'll have to work through that. But I think it's past time that we've started to include these households in the measurement.
Okay, all right. Is there internal discussion within your respective companies regarding Nielsen versus ComScore methodology?
Is that directed to me? Or,
Anybody, actually.
okay. I mean, I can tell we are in Nielsen. We're a Nielsen agency, and we expect to continue to be a Nielsen agency.
That's the answer you usually get, Janet. Most of the agencies are still, the currency guide is Nielsen, and ComScore is, while it's available and a different methodology, it's not really, we're using it for posting potentially or something else, but not to negotiate deals at this point. I mean, having it is fine, but having it accepted by Brad and other agencies is the bigger question.
Mhm. I think more of our conversations are revolving around attribution and getting beyond the age and gender conversation and look for an actionable piece of information that we can all act on. Brad can, move more product and services, and we can capture more of his money because we're able to gain some insights into how his schedules are performing.
Yeah, Becky, I think that's a really good point. I think that is a big focus going forward for us.
It should be for all of us. I mean, next gen is, it's going to be here before we know it.
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to anticipate 5 years ahead, not tomorrow.
Right. We have a question from Sarah Scott Goon, which is very interesting. She wanted to know about issue advertising. She notes that it tends to pop even in an off year with a new administration. Does this represent an opportunity?
Who knows? I mean, we've got, it was interesting. I had a conversation with Mike Jones, who is in Washington, D.C. for us, and where typically the planning season and those requests come at July, August, we're already getting them for 2022. So is there anything is possible based on what we've just all lived through, with the election year? So sure.
Okay.
What was interesting is that in 2020, obviously the biggest political year all of us have ever experienced, but it actually ended up representing over 25% of the entire industry's annual revenue. It was massive. 2022 is shaping up, in my opinion. This isn't White Over talking, this is me talking. It's going to be huge. The fight for seats in the Senate as well as the House is going to get ugly. It's going to be supported by PAC money like nobody's seen. I mean, just yesterday, the Ohio Republican Center announced he's not going to rerun. The governor of Arizona, who was supposed to run for the Senate seat, said, I'm not doing it. So there's 2 more seats the Republicans are now suddenly without that they have to fight for. The money is going to be pretty massive for 2022. And Rick can probably speak to it, but I think 2024 general election is going to be as big as what we just saw.
Yeah, I agree. And these are the years actually that we all do well in, because there's 36 governor's races. There's, the down ballots that we don't usually get in a presidential year are active. So you got, I tell people, they say, why is that a better year than a president? Well, we're not, if you're not in a swing state, you're not going to get the presidential money. But if you're in a 22, you're going to get attorney general's races. You're going to get races locally that spend significant amounts of money in the state, along, like I said, like with 36 governor's races, and all the Senate, 34 Senate seats are up, as Bruce is pointing out as well, some of the recent situations that have occurred, and then all the House seats are up again. So the cycle is there. So the down ballot feels it's going to be as robust, if not more so. I mean, the spending presidential wise is always, given its own due because of its, that's the bigger year. But, these are the years where we all kind of are active everywhere in every state pretty much. So
who knows, in 2022, 2024, we may yet have a third major political party.
That's right. That'll be interesting if it happens. We're almost up to the 2 o'clock cutoff, but I wanted to see if I could sneak in one more question. This comes from Jim Bellianis. He's asking, do you see advertisers using geo-targeting with local television similar to how political advertisers by increasing given the growing diversity of our sales as revealed in the 2020 national elections?
Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. That was one thing about, with OTT and digital, we are doing geofencing and zip coding and selling into the marketplace. So we do have inventory in areas where we can do that in geofence. It's small scale now, but I think as we were talking about earlier, once these holdings start to become bigger and have the ability to, start to target into congressional districts, there's definitely, some thought on that as a additional add-on to our business currently, for sure.
Anybody else have some thoughts on that?
I think
Well,
it's-
I agree. I think next gen is going to drive that too. I mean,
Definitely.
go for it.
Yeah, I was just gonna jump in with that too. Next gen, we'll get more receivers in the population. I mean, the industry's proud of its rate of launching next gen TV stations on a market basis. More and more signals available to more and more TV households, which is great. But it's actually the consumer side that really drives the pace of innovation there. And I think the Consumer Technology Association forecasted maybe there'll be 24 million next gen sets in homes by 2024. So it'd be great to see that be a bigger number. But between TV sets and gateway devices, that's starting to become a viable platform. And with the IP native kind of signal and the ability to get some back channel with connected TVs and devices, it's great to combine the reach of over the air with that targetability, including geo-targetability that political advertisers and really every advertiser wants. For the most part, coming from an over-the-air platform as well as all the digital platforms.
Well, I love to end a session on a happy note. That sounds great. I want to thank all of our panelists, Julio Maringhi from CBS, Becky Meyer from Gray, Brad Thompson from Worldwide, Rick Ducey, BIA Advisory Services, and last but not least, Bruce Roberts from Wide Orbit. Thank you so much. It really, really was a wonderful discussion.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Janet.
everybody.
Thanks, Janet.
Stay healthy.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.